I married when I was 21, and shortly after that, I had my second near-death experience. I was unwell in bed, suffering from flu-like symptoms. When I felt myself fainting, I dashed to the bathroom. Before I could go to the restroom, I passed out and collapsed on the bedroom floor. I was floating up on the bedroom ceiling the next thing I knew. My spouse was kneeling next to me, calling my name. He shouted out to me, "Barb! Barb!" "Up here." "I'm up here," I said back. "Take a look at the ceiling." I had no idea why he couldn't hear me. I eventually got bored of attempting to converse with him and started glancing around the room. Nothing appeared to be out of place. The bed, lamp, and all of the furnishings were all in their proper places. Then I noticed a round, circular swirling motion on the ceiling on my right side. I was intrigued, so I floated towards the action and joined it. I emerged on the other side into a tiny waiting room that could barely fit one person. Well, not exactly one person. I suppose I should say one soul, or whatever I am now. I couldn't see anything in the tiny waiting room because it was completely dark. I didn't have a physical body, yet I was still myself. I consider myself to be an extremely intelligent person. After what seemed like a few moments, an unseen force drew me from the waiting room into the main part of the tunnel. I could see a shimmering, shining veil that divided me from a youngster on one side and an elderly man on the other side of the main tunnel, which wasn't as dark as the waiting area. The veil was fashioned of a gray glistening foreign substance. For the majority of my trek down this tunnel, my attention was pulled to this veil. It held my attention. I was no longer being dragged down the tunnel when I spotted a swarm of dark shadows approaching me. As the shadows neared, they transformed into humans clothed in period attire. They began yelling out their names as they stood in front of me. They were family members from both sides of my family. I couldn't place any of them because I'd never known somebody who had died before. They were overjoyed to see me. My relatives were talking amongst themselves when two women agreed to accompany me down the tunnel, so I wouldn't be afraid. The rest of my relatives continued to converse as they vanished into thin air right in front of my eyes. I stepped in between the two women while they conversed. They didn't seem to have seen each other in a long time. I peered at the veil, wondering what it was made of and what it may be used for on Earth. "You must continue traveling alone," one woman murmured, interrupting my thoughts. Then both of them vanished into thin air, just like my other relatives. Panic sets in quickly. I noticed a little bright white light the size of a pinhead while looking around. Every instinct told me to go in the direction of the light. As I got closer to the light, it grew bigger. Even though the light was now 4 inches around, I was still a long way away. When I heard a male voice exclaim, "Enter no further," I came to a complete stop. Looking down at my feet, I noticed a clear line on the tunnel's pathway. The tunnel appeared to be a considerably lighter shade of gray on the other side of the line. I immediately understood that the tunnel had been turning lighter and lighter hues of gray as I walked down it. All of my instincts urged me not to cross the boundary at that point. When I turned back, I observed a white figure to my left. There was no doubt who this figure was. It was my Lord and Savior, Jesus. As I glanced at him, I had the impression that there was another universe above us. I knew this was where God was, and that I was not permitted to see any of his realm. I sensed a familiar bond between God, Jesus, and myself. It was love that brought us together. We were all the same, yet we were also distinct. My attention was drawn back to my Lord as he said, "You must answer these questions before you may enter." This is referred to as our life evaluation. The first question: how have you assisted others? I excitedly replied, telling him what I had done. "That's good," he said. The second question: what have you learned in your life? I informed him what I had discovered. "That's fine," he said, "but there's more you need to understand." The third question: what part of yourself did you give? I began to respond, but felt perplexed. He demonstrated and told me everything that had happened in my life, both good and bad. You trade places with the people you wounded in your life review. You're aware of the emotional distress you've caused them. It was difficult to see how I had harmed others. I begged him to stop playing my life's movie. He informed me I had to return to Earth after reviewing my life. I knew he was correct, but I couldn't go since there was so much unconditional love here. Besides, I had a lot of questions for him. Before returning to Earth, he informed me I may ask him questions. My inquiries. The first question: what am I doing and where am I? I initially assumed he was speaking in a foreign language. I replied, "Please, God, I'm a simple guy," to put it succinctly. "Think of this as the tunnel of grays," he said. "From darkness to light, from heaven to hell. The in-between realms are represented by the many colors of gray. The tunnel I was presently in would be represented by a stack of CDs piled from the floor, dark, to the ceiling, or bright. God revealed to me a panoramic vision of the tunnel." The second question: how far away from the floor was the earth? Answer: about 12 inches. The third question: where would I go if I decided not to return to Earth? About 24 inches from the ceiling. The fourth query: what would happen if I opted to stay? It's impossible to put into words. The fifth question: could I possibly witness hell? I flew down the tunnel and landed on a little pedestal flanked by two massive angels on either side of me. Despite the fact that I couldn't see the angels' wings, I knew they were special and had been sent to protect me. I couldn't see much when I first looked around. I saw human and demonic entities beneath me as my eyes acclimated to the darkness. There were various levels with various forms of torture going on. I saw Satan hiding in the back, directing his minions. When Satan and I exchanged glances, he directed his minions to find me. They charged and ascended the pedestal, piled on top of one another and attempting to seize me. They would have gotten to me if it hadn't been for the angels God had sent with me to defend me. I looked up at the angels and began begging God, pleading with him to help take me out of here. I told God I'd do everything he wanted, and that if I had knees, I'd be begging him. God left me on that pedestal for a few seconds longer to teach me a lesson. And believe me, I learned. I never want to return to hell. The sixth question: would you mind showing me more? Off the tunnel of grays, God showed me some of the world. He named the highest point in elevation Twinkle Lights. There are small little spots that glitter like stars. The sparkle lights are beneath that world. These are larger dots that glitter like diamonds. Another world was known as the White Souls. They resemble fluffy white clouds. I named one realm the Living World because it appeared like Earth when I glanced through the doorway. There were trees, flowers, and grass. Everything in this world shone brightly. It was as though there was fiber optic lights illuminating the colors. These were the exact colors that my grandfather had shown me as a child. The colors were vibrant and clear, with crystal clarity. These vibrant souls were breathing and floating around, generating various forms of flora. They communicated by emitting distinct tones that sounded like music. One little petal on a flower required billions of souls. I discovered that if we call on them or pray to them, any soul can come out of their realm to help us by using the tunnel of grays. God then showed me what my destiny will be like after I return to Earth. I was astounded. I never imagined someone like me could become so remarkable. "You'll remember nothing after you return to Earth," he said. I said, "That's not right. My presence here should serve a purpose." He added that after you've lived an experience on Earth, you'll remember seeing it first here. I was back inside my body with a swooshing and sucking sound. I could hear my spouse calling my name even before I opened my eyes. When I opened my eyes, my husband was still on his knees by my side. I assured him that everything would be okay and that he should not be concerned. God would ask me to go on missions for him after this near-death experience. My responsibilities were simple at first, but as time passed, they became increasingly difficult. But that's another story. I was sexually abused between the ages of 3 and 5. Throughout the abuse, a lady would approach me and speak to me. I couldn't hear her, but I could feel her presence and hear her words in my thoughts. She would tell me to pay attention to her and not to what was going on around me. I looked up at the ceiling, listening to her soothing voice. I enjoyed it when she sang to me. I recall observing the scene from the top of the ceiling or inside the bedroom mirror at other times. Because I was lying beneath my abuser, I shouldn't have been able to observe what was going on. I now realize I was having out-of-body experiences. My mother thought I was too old to have an imaginary companion when I was in 7th school. He wasn't a figment of my imagination because I could see him clearly. He wore an old-fashioned hat, suspenders to keep his slacks up, and tying shoes. He was completely gray. We communicated telepathically while laughing, playing, and telling stories. He was my best friend on the planet. We lived near a government facility where jets were tested. Some jets flew low overhead one day. The roar of the jets startled me so much that I ran outside with my imaginary companion alongside me. My father explained why the aircrafts were flying so low to me. I was pleased with his response. I moved away slowly. My friend advised me to pause and gaze up at the sky. "What do you see?" he inquired. I informed him that I'd seen a blue sky with white clouds and bright sunshine. "Look again," he said, waving his hand. This time, I noticed a lovely park with trees and flowers. The colors were bold, crisp, and spectacular. I had never seen such vibrant colors before. It was as if there had been no pollution. The rainbow's colors were all clean and clear. My friend then waved his hand once more. This vision abruptly ended, and a new one began. It depicted black smoke, demolished buildings, jets flying overhead, and disaster. It was diametrically opposed to the initial vision. My friend informed me that we have a choice here on Earth. We may love each other and realize the first vision of lovely colors, or we could hate each other and realize the second vision of destroying the Earth. We had complete control over the decision. What my friend had shown me, I told my mom. My mother disliked my friend and told me he was the devil and that I needed to expel him. I did what was told after much deliberation. When I got older, I realized my mother was raised to dread God. She had no idea my pal was teaching me about good and evil. When my father died in 2010, I discovered a photograph of his father. That's when I realized my imaginary companion was my grandfather. He was wearing an antique farmer's hat, suspenders to keep up his pants, and shoes that nodded. I also discovered his death certificate, which said that he had died 4 months before my birth. My grandma would frequently tell me how much I resembled my grandfather. Grandma and I were really close all my life. Grandma made me pledge not to tell anyone about our ability to converse telepathically. I kept our secret hidden until she died. At the age of 12, I had a near-death experience. I was allowed to swim alone in our pond when I was 12 years old. My mother, who couldn't swim, stood at the water's edge, observing. I wanted to show off by swimming to the center of the 6-foot deep pond. I felt a cramp on my side and began to sink into the water. Soon, I couldn't see the sunlight above my head through the surface of the water. As I sunk farther and lower beneath the surface, I was surrounded by darkness. For what felt like an eternity, I held my breath. When I finally gave in and took a short gulp of water, I felt my lungs would burst. Breathing in the water felt refreshing, and not at all what I had expected. I inhaled another small swig of water via my nostrils and let it pass down my throat. There was still no pain. I gulped down a spoonful of water. As expected, there was no choking sensation. Instead, the water felt soothing as it passed down my throat. I kept breathing in water until my lungs didn't feel like they were about to burst. I had a sense of calm. I watched as a dazzling white light flowed up through the water from my chest. I could see my corporeal body beneath me as I looked down. With my blonde hair fanned out, my physical form appeared tranquil, calm, and mannequin-like. My arms were loose and poised slightly apart from my torso, and my legs were standing with my feet in the dirt. I resembled a life-size doll. I felt at ease now that I was in spirit form, and I wasn't afraid or anxious about anything. I was utterly disconnected from my physical body in every manner. Then I heard a familiar voice address me. It was the same calm, compassionate voice that spoke to me as a youngster during my sexual abuse. The only thing I recall the lady saying to me was that I had one more job to perform on Earth, and that I needed to return to my body. And with that, my feet burst from the muddy bottom of the pond, like a bullet shooting out of a rifle. I quickly breached the surface of the sea, choking and spitting out water. I swam to the water's edge, where my enraged mother yelled at me for being in the water for too long. As I walked back to the house, I came to a halt and turned around, looking at the pond and wondering what had happened to me. Then I heard my mother yelling at me to come into the house. In 2008, I divorced my husband. I decided to divorce my husband in 2008. My father had been lonely since my mother's death and had invited me to live with him. I seized the opportunity and created a home for my cat and myself. I grew quite ill and was hospitalized before the divorce was finalized. I was exhausted when I got home from the hospital and did nothing but sleep in bed. I began to pray for my cross. I prayed not for healing, but for God to forgive all of us for what we'd done to his son. I reflected on what Jesus must have gone through in his life. All of his agony, sacrifice, torment, and how we abandoned him. He had gone through so much for us, and what had we done in return? It just didn't seem right. I prayed for my cross all hours of day and night. Through prayer, I began a new life. My blind eyes and ears opened. I was shown how to use love to battle the darkness and how to do energy work. Inside the home, dried raindrops fell on me. All of the white light guides and light workers arrived to instruct me. Mists, orbs, healing colors and tones, visions, souls, ancient symbols flood my bedroom. Mantras would play, angels would appear, and my Lord would appear wearing his most gleaming crown. My bedroom was transformed into a magnificent spectacle. I worked and studied quite hard. I was finally on the path I was meant to be on. My father and cat were my last two earthly links, and I was warned it wouldn't be long until I lost both of them. I lost my father in 2010, and my cat in February 2011. I was now free to start a new life serving God.